I love that image of being a far way off and the father running to meet his son. It means that every day while the son was gone, the father would just maybe go to a normal spot, maybe the spot that he could see the furthest, and just look to the horizon. And one day he sees him. And if you've ever, I've been told I have a kind of distinctive walk. When I walk, I bounce a little bit. And so, that moment when you recognize someone, even though you can't make out their features, but their very walk is known to you, that for the father who had not seen his son in some time, that he could recognize him maybe even from that walk a great distance off. That is the prodigal father at work. Now, very rarely do I admit up front how much I've stolen from another source, but if you've ever read Henry Nouwen's book, The Prodigal Son, a lot of the ideas that I have today come from that book. It's a phenomenal book in which Nouwen, sort of reflects against his experience of seeing the Caravaggio painting of the prodigal son and sort of, studying it and sitting with it and also recognizing his own position in each of the three people in this parable. Being himself lost and away, himself being the older brother, and then also himself being sort of in that fatherly role of needing to sort of, reach out and be compassionate. And that image has stuck with me ever since I read it when I was, a first-year novice, praying with the exercises, praying in this moment of trying to understand how much is it that God truly loves me. It seems weird. I was already in the novitiate. I was already sort of like trying to understand my vocation. And still as that novice, and I think in some ways we're always going to wrestle with that question, is really how much does God love me? These moments in which I listen to so many wonderful people share their stories, whether it's in, a sacramental setting or in, spiritual counseling or spiritual direction, how often that very sense of being loved at our very fiber, being loved from the very beginning, is something that so many people continue to wrestle with. And we do it in the subtle ways that we talk about ourselves. Sometimes, it's very explicit language that we sort of talk down to ourselves. Oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not as good as that person over there, right? We talk in a certain way in which we already begin to cut ourselves down. We already sort of take out our legs because we somehow have internalized a world, a secular world in particular, that constantly wants to remind us that we're not enough. But today's gospel, whether it's today's reading that we hear at this Mass or at the 10:30 Mass, those who are entering into the church will have this moment of being able to hear the story from the Gospel of John, which is the man born blind. The way that we can be in need both of healing and of witnessing those miracles. Let me break that apart, right? So the man born blind, the question that sort of begins that story is, well, whose fault was it? What did this guy do wrong? The presumption, he's not enough. What did he do wrong to be born blind? Or in this particular case, the son himself sort of has that moment when he is at his absolute lowest. We're told in a lot of levels, and in Luke, there's always sort of this three different levels, right? First, we're told he goes and he spends his life in debauchery, right? He wastes all of his money. Second, in order to get by, he goes and he does the one thing that Jews can't do, and that's actually work for someone with herd swine, like actually working with pigs. And then third, he identifies himself with the pigs because he wants to eat what they eat. He's just so hungry, he wants to eat what they eat. But that sort of tells you how low this son has taken himself, that he, in his mind, has given up everything. And in the Gospel of John's story about the man being born blind, we have this wonderful interaction in the long version of the story of like when the Pharisees and people say, wait, no, this guy wasn't the guy who was born blind. He just looks like him. And they don't even give him the dignity to ask him himself. And finally says, no, I was them. I was born blind. And then they're like, well, let's talk to his parents because he still doesn't have dignity. He still isn't worth something, right? And all of these messages that we're hearing, whether it's in the Gospel of John, or whether it's in Luke, or whether it's in our modern day era, in which we're just simply not enough. But God stands just sort of casually in his favorite spot, I mean, there are a lot of these great spots all around the Twin Cities, but perhaps my favorite is really close over at Ramsey Hill. That great image of just sort of looking over that valley, and it feels like you can see forever on some days. God goes there. And I'm not talking that he can see down the hill somebody walking up. I mean, I imagine that the Father is so intent on every day searching that it's actually across the high bridge that he might be able to notice that walk. That he begins his run long before the Son is ever aware that the Father is running towards him, right? One of my niece and nephew, my two little nieces, my nephew is 7, he turned 7 on Monday, and my niece is 4, and their favorite game today, because we were celebrating his birthday, was, like kind of sneaking up on Uncle RJ, right? And they'd come around, and they're not very sneaky, right? I mean, because you can hear them for like a mile. Especially my nephew, who's just like laughing by the time he's getting to me, like, we're going to scare him. But I still pretend to be surprised, right? Unlike that, like that moment in which you're sort of like lost in your own thoughts, that you suddenly, like somebody does sort of seem to appear out of nowhere, I kind of imagine that that's what's happening here, right? The Son is rehearsing his script. I'm not worthy to be called your son. I'm not worthy to be called your son. Just hire me as a servant. Just hire me as a servant. I'm not worthy to be called your son, right? But already long before the Son becomes aware of the Father's presence, the Father is already running out towards him. He's already racing towards him. And you can almost hear it in today's reading, right? Like the Son begins his well-rehearsed script, right? The one he came up with when he was like starving, like, Father, I'm not even worthy to be your son. But the Father isn't even listening to this script. Like his admission of all of this is sort of secondary. Because the Father's already saying, hey, bring him a robe, get him a ring, get him sandals, let's kill the fattened calf, let's make this a party. My son who was dead is now alive. But the world tells us we're not good enough. The world constantly reminds us that, in order to do it, you have to do it the right way. And enter the older brother, enter the Pharisees in the Gospel of John's story, enter those people who are constantly sort of sitting back and watching and going, oh, so he's just going to forget everything. Oh, he's just going to be all cool with it. Like it's all forgotten. Like, that judgy sort of like a harshness feel. And if it seems like I'm playing this up a little bit, it's probably because I'm trying to avoid the fact that I do this. I don't always want to do it, but I do this, right? Like I look at someone and say, oh, they're going to go to that kind of, they're going to that establishment, or they're going to hang out with those people, whether they're Republicans or they're Democrats or whomever they have to sit with, right? Or, they're the kind of people, I don't think that place has been really good with the whole pandemic thing. Or this place has been really good with the pandemic thing, but, who's going here, who's doing what? Almost every day, I have a moment in which I recognize that I have a hardness of heart. Or who's worthy of God's divine healing power? Who's worthy in that same way? Like that infection that secular culture has taught me in terms of not being good enough is something that infects my heart, infects my mind, such that I can dish that out to other people. I begin to judge. I begin to sort of say, ooh, who's sitting with whom, who's doing what? And again, God sort of goes beyond that. And I love that sense of like there's a huge party, the oldest son has to be fuming, he's upset, he's not going to go in, but the Father comes out and just begins to talk to him. He pleads with him, but it's in sort of the sense of like, my friend, recognize the gift that you have here. Recognize what is happening in here. And so the real invitation, whether it's, being healed from our spiritual blindness, whether it's being, coming to terms with our own being the older brother or sister, whatever that happens to be, I think the invitation in today's readings is simple. Can we allow the healing power of gratitude into our lives? The Father is so grateful that great running, I couldn't do it, but I can imagine, God probably could do it, right? Like running up the high bridge in the wrong direction, right? Because if you run one way, you're going downhill, that's easy. But if you're running uphill, that'd be way harder. Or if you're being reached out to by just having someone just to be with you and to say, hey, I want you to be part of this. Or perhaps just making that mud pie and putting that on your eyes and healing you. Whatever that happens to be, can we take a moment and be mindful of how God is interacting with us right now? Can we take a moment and be grateful that it begins with gratitude in order for us to truly be healed? Yes, we acknowledge our failures, we acknowledge where we've gone wrong, but it is by beginning with our gratitude. It is by beginning with that sense of recognizing the way that God rushes out to meet us that we can turn away from that secular ideal. Because in fact, we are worth it.